tomorrow in Ottawa, you start to see a small fraction of the lives he touched in 55 years of priesthood. As we offer our Mass for him today, we thank God for the 20,000 or so Masses that he offered for us. Ed was born to Emmett and Mercedes Higgins on August 24th, 1931 in Ottawa, Illinois. He was a true Irishman. A visit with Ed meant hearing story after story, many of them even true. They were all accompanied with a twinkle in the eye at no extra charge. He was an older brother to Anne, who was the subject of some of his first teaching attempts. These included how to play baseball and all the Latin responses to the Mass. She was really doing what could help himself get them down so he could become an altar server. He attended Ottawa High School, excelling in his studies and in having fun. To be around Ed meant that he was up for any adventure, and so you had to be also. His vocation goes back to the summer after graduation. Some people think that all priests are born with some kind of priest gene. But their talents, abilities, likes and dislikes cover the whole human spectrum. They are representative of the universal priesthood of the faithful that we all share in by our baptisms, because these are the faithful who will be served by them. At some point, a call comes to him and must be answered. After high school, Ed had planned to go to Creighton to study to become a pharmacist. During that summer, he decided he wanted to become a priest. There were two problems. One, his dad had already sent in a $50 non-refundable depository. $50 was a lot of money back then. And two, sort of a sign of indecisiveness to his father at a time when you were supposed to know what you were doing. When his father looked into his eyes, he realized that this meant everything to him. The next hurdle was his interview with the bishop before being accepted as a seminarian. He was worried that the bishop would ask why he went to the public high school rather than to Marquette. Sure enough, in the interview, Bishop Sloan said, "You're from Ottawa. You went to Marquette." Without batting an eye, Ed fired back right across the street. He was sent to St. Ambrose College for his undergraduate studies. While there, he met Jim Campbell, who was one of the day students. Jim was later accepted into the seminary himself, despite health concerns that the diocese had, and they became classmates at St. Paul Seminary. Ed would sometimes refer to him, our future Vicar General, as Grandpa, because he had served in World War II and was older than the rest of them. After ordination, Jim asked him once if he'd like to go to the opera with him. Ed said, "Opera?" But as I said, Ed was always up for new adventures. He went, he enjoyed it so much, he wound up getting season tickets to the Lyric Opera for 40 years. Father Ed's first assignment was at St. Mark's here in Peoria. He was the third assistant to Father Fitzgerald, and always used to claim that he was a 65th birthday present to him from the bishop. Father Fitz had his own way of doing things and wasn't always receptive to change. And one of the ways that Ed and Father Dale McCoy tried to loosen him up was by pre-planning their dinner conversations. They would start arguing a theological point. Ed would always take the liberal side. Dale McCoy would always take the conservative. They would go at it until it looked like they were almost going to come to blows. When Fitz would step in and be the reconciler, and they would both thank him for it. In addition to his one Sunday Mass that he would say each week, he also taught at St. Mark's School and coached basketball. Once while he was at St. Mark's, one of his classmates asked him what his day off was. When Ed said that he didn't get one, his classmate got irate until he learned about all the golfing afternoons he spent with Fitz, season tickets to the Bradley basketball games, and he was wondering how he could get assigned there. After the Vatican Council, he helped Father Fitzgerald adjust to the changes. By the end of their 16 years together, he was the only assistant, and he took care of him until his death. Ed always retained a place in his heart for his first and only pastor. Years later, when someone gave him a dog, he even named it Fitz. In 1973, he became pastor at Monticello, and over the years served parishes in Streator, Pontiac, Lincoln, Atlanta, and Mason City. By then, a bit of Father Fitz had rubbed off on him, as he was able to make tough decisions that sometimes needed to be made. As a pastor, he succeeded because the Mass was the center of who he was as a priest, because he truly loved people. Our gospel this morning was chosen because it reflects who Ed was. 2 disciples were walking 7 miles from Jerusalem to Emmaus on the original Easter morning, trying to make sense of what had happened over the past 3 days. Jesus meets up and walks with them, a marvelous opportunity to listen to him for a couple of hours, needed to get to their destination, so they're prevented from seeing who he is. When they arrive, he pretends he's going on farther, but is persuaded to stay and eat with them. It is not until he says the blessing and breaks the bread that their eyes are open to who he is. Many of our fondest memories of Father Ed are nice, leisurely meals shared with him. Meals with plenty of time to listen to his stories, maybe get in a few of your own. No matter how many stories you've shared, you didn't really know him until you had the chance to be able to pray with him in the Mass. See the faith that made him who he was. Anyone who celebrates the Eucharist can't help but be moved by him. It's the sign and the summit of the vocation a priest is called to. It is a living reminder, each celebration we're called to feed Christ's sheep, to do it with our lives in whatever ways we're able. The second reading from St. Paul today was chosen because it is just one of the ordination readings. One of the great joys for Father Ed was watching his sister's family grow and becoming their Uncle Eddie. How cool is it to have an uncle who has his own plane and can fly you whenever he came to visit? Over the years, he baptized his nephew and nieces, officiated at their weddings, baptized their children. The picture that you see on the cover of the program is of Ed and most of the great-nephews and nieces he baptized. You were very much loved by him and were the subject of many of his stories. Having mentioned flying, I need to add that he was a longtime member of the Grace Pilot Association. Father Rem went to many of their conventions together, even after Ed didn't recertify his license after his heart surgery. He loved flying for its own sake, rather than just get from point to point. Having said that, he once flew the parents of a couple whose ceremony he was going to perform to the wedding when they weren't otherwise able to get there. Why weren't they able to get there? Because commercial flights weren't flying because of the weather. You do have time for a few more stories, don't you? Okay. Once when he was in Streator, a priest assigned there to live in residence and to work with the Hispanic ministry in the area. One day, Father Javier Cuevas showed up at his door, very limited English, asking for Padre Higgins. And that first afternoon, communicating mostly through sign language, Ed taught him enough English to get by, and picked up some Spanish along the way. In their years together, Ed learned much about Mexican culture and was enriched by it. During his years in Pontiac, he got to know Father Jonas Callahan, longtime chaplain at the Pontiac Correctional Center. He was inspired by his work at the prison. Father Callahan's descriptions of his work there, especially praying to inmates before their executions, had a profound impact on him. And Father Jonas became golfing buddies and friends for life. Years ago, Father Ed helped Father Campbell get a beginning experience started in our diocese. On one of these weekends for the divorced and widowed, he was wearing a name tag with Father Ed in large block letters, and Father was abbreviated FR. One of the participants in the weekend who missed the period just called him Fred. And from that moment on, for the rest of the weekend, he was Fred. And for many beginning experience weekends after that, he remained Fred. And now I hope you realize that Ed was a priest, and a people person. You've heard of the 6 degrees of separation, that everyone on earth is connected to everyone else by no more than 6 intermediaries. For Ed, it was more like 1 degree of separation. He could walk up to a total stranger, and after a while, they would come up with someone in common that they both knew, and then he could start into his stories about them. Father Ed's last assignment was in Lincoln. He had been in Pontiac for 12 years. It was starting to look like the parish that he would be retiring from. He received a call from Monsignor Campbell that Bishop Myers wanted him to go to Lincoln. He asked for the weekend to think it over. But he knew as soon as he hung up that he would say yes. He always saw that as the first obligation of a priest, to be obedient. He was a healing presence there for 6 years, even after having passed retirement age, and his Parkinson's disease was starting to manifest in its early stages. But after leaving Lincoln, he just couldn't sit around and do nothing. So he helped Father Claire, whom he had served at St. Mark's, by taking up residence in Hennepin, and served the people there for 3 years. By that time, at times his voice was sometimes no more than a mere whisper. But it proclaimed the gospel in other ways. All the people there, all the parishioners he served, saw a priest whose life had become the service he could render to them. They understood the sacrifice of the Mass as clearly as if they had been able to witness Christ carrying his cross to Calvary. The last priestly service that Monsignor Higgins offered was on the Friday before he died. One of his fellow residents at St. Clair's was a former parishioner at St. Mark's who was celebrating her 100th birthday. And she insisted that Monsignor come to her party. It took all this effort, but with both hands, he gave her his final blessing. We've gathered here today to commend this man, Monsignor, Father Ed, Emmett, Fred, Padre Higgins, Uncle Eddie, or whoever he was to you, our Father in heaven. We're able to do so because of the faith he had in the resurrection, faith he shared with so many people over the years. We ask that any sins committed through human weakness be forgiven because of his faith and the love with which he answered God's call. Finally, I think that Father Ed would be very pleased to know that his funeral was taking place on Fat Tuesday. I hope that all of you will be able to join us in the Pastoral Center after the Mass. I tried to share as many stories as I could reasonably fit in. There'll be plenty of time